Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unique Professions. Now, many businesses, like to have their brand noticed. They like to have their brand well known. They want to advertise it, and media is a great way to advertise your business. We have Carmen Braidwood here, who has a long list of expertise in broadcasting. You'll probably be able to be familiar with her voice if you live in Perth or in Australia at least. So it's a pleasure to have Carmen Braidwood. How are you?
I'm very, very well, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, David.
Now, I'm going to jump into media training in just a bit, but I want to know, just from the first perspective, why do you love the media so much?
Yeah, I ask myself that question daily, I think, David. I do. I like to get a little pulse on how I'm feeling about the media today because it has been a checkered past I've had with the media. I've had all the highs and all the lows of being a person who's chasing a media career and wants to work in the media. And I think that there is still at the base of it all this baseline love and affection for being a person who can communicate and connect with large audiences all at once. And that is very much what we do in the traditional media. You think about broadcasting, the word broadcasting, which is a little different to podcasting. As a broadcaster, you are looking for ways to speak to the collective, to speak to a really wide audience and to tap in to that zeitgeist, thing that's going on right now. And I remember one of my earliest producing gigs, casual producing gig on a Saturday night at 6PR, and I was still only 20 years old, and just realising that, if there's an incident involving a police officer on horseback down on the foreshore during the Sky Show, then we could cover that, at 8 p.m. and beyond on Radio Live. And there's just something really special about that. So that's the thing. It's the immediacy. It's the what's everyone thinking? What's everyone feeling? Can we reflect that? And that's why I'm a radio girl first and foremost.
Yep.
And that's why I still, even though I'm not completely in it anymore, that is why I still love the media and why I will always have some little hand in something broadcasting going on.
Okay, and now we're going to delve right into the media training.
Okay.
What was the absolute crucial point for you when you thought, hang on, I can actually train other people? What was the moment for you?
Oh gosh, if it was to come down to a moment, I would say that it was a chiropractor.
Yep.
And this chiropractor said to me, I see you present on TV. Could you teach me to do that? And I didn't understand back then. This is about 10 to 12 years ago, yeah, a bit more than that. And I said, oh, well, why? Why do you need to do that? And he explained to me that he wanted to make social media content. He wanted to communicate about his profession. And, there's a lot of controversy at times. It's a misunderstood profession, chiropractic. So he wanted to educate his audience as well as provide value to them so that they could look after themselves and have better health moving forward. I even said, oh, well, why, if you give all that education and advice online, would people come and see you in real life? And of course, he explained to me that this is the reason people would come to him, because they trust him and they trust the profession. It'd be good for the profession, but also his business. And when I realised that I could bring that value to a business owner, I thought, oh, there's something in this. This is a way that the media can train everyday people. It's almost, in my mind, became this kind of democratization of media training, because media training is something a bit different, to your corporates and to your football teams and your local government organisations. They're people who could get a phone call from a talkback radio show or from a current affair and cop a grilling, right? And they need to be ready for that grilling, or they need to handle a crisis. And I wasn't always certain I was the person for that job. But when I realised that in this new modern media age, everyday people, like yourself, David, they're going to want to make a podcast, or they're going to need to tell a story in the modern media about who they are and what they do in order to control their own narrative. Because let's face it, when you're on broadcasting, we don't get the chance to tell all the stories. as I said in that last answer, we're looking to appeal to the widest possible audience. But in this modern media age, we can have narrow casting opportunities. We can go extremely niche and tell very niche stories. We can tell our own stories in our content. And that was what I thought, I can do this media training thing, but with a spin, with a little bit of a twist. And that was where the Confidence on Camera program came from. And I will point out that is also when I started to do traditional media training as well, because as you've shared, I do have a very long background now, 22 years of working in the broadcast media that I can share insights from.
So your Confidence on Camera that you're doing right now, how does that work?
For most people, I have realised that no matter how you tend to describe it, the things that hold us back from being on camera are steeped in fear. So we need to demystify. We need to use a little bit of shock therapy, if you like, a little bit of exposure therapy. And the same as a traditional media trainer would, and you wouldn't know this if you're not from a corporate background, but in media training, we stick you in a studio. And we give you the headphones if they're required, or the earpiece if it's required. We show you the lighting, we show you the big cameras, and we expose you to what it feels like if you were to go in and record a television or a radio interview, or to go live in one of these environments, right? So same thing applies with Confidence on Camera, except maybe I'll do it with a rig that you might use at home to make your own social media content. We're using, phones these days have cameras that shoot 4K. It's wonderful quality. They've got incredible different settings inside that give you great looking content as well. So we're using everyday items and we're giving you this ability in a slightly pressurized environment, right? So in a live training space, either virtually or together in the room, where you do need to develop that ability to think on your feet. Because if there's one thing I've learned about the presence of a camera is that it can rob even the most experienced expert of all of their hard-earned knowledge, their amazing charisma that maybe you have in a meeting room or down the pub with friends. All of that can just go. And I know that because it's happened to me, and I've watched it happen to other clients as well. And there are techniques just like that exposure that are going to help you navigate that feeling of being uncomfortable and know that you can handle it any time.
I suppose, the fear of it all is not uncommon, because you're putting yourself in a different sort of situation. And, maybe people strive for perfection as well.
Sure do.
Yeah, I think that's, something that you have to navigate that, don't you?
Yeah, I've definitely been affected by that continual striving for perfection and letting that hold me back. And it held me back in a few ways because I wouldn't engage in that process that I've just shared with you, that process where you do try things that feel awkward and uncomfortable. Then you review the footage and you go, how can we do better? I didn't watch myself on television because, as I've explained to you, my main career has been radio. I've been full-time in radio up until 5-6 years ago. I've always had some kind of radio gig. And I ventured into TV in a part-time basis, right? But I would do these TV appearances and I'd fill them full of importance. I'd be like, this is my chance to take my career to the next level. I would attach all of these expectations and outcomes to that one little moment, like a live cross on a show like The Project or The Today Show. And I would just attribute all of this worth to that moment. And I was focusing on all the wrong things. I was focusing on how my hair looked and how my face looked and the clothes I wore and the location, and instead of thinking about, well, who's the audience and where's the value that I can bring to this show and to that audience. And once I realised it wasn't about me, things got better, but for a long time they didn't. And I would get on air and I would stuff up royally. There have been some giant stuff-ups I've done on national television that I'm not afraid to share. In my own podcast, I play back that audio. There have been moments where I lost the capacity to really form words that are English because I was so frightened, so nervous and thinking about all the wrong things. And it affects your ability to be agile. And once I got over that and said, oh, well, I'm going to sit down and watch these performances and work out what I could have done better, I got better. And we all experience this fear. We all are very protective of the way we are perceived by others. And that's okay. It's once we admit that and know that no matter what level we're at, that doesn't mean we're not a good person. It doesn't mean we're not good at our job. And I do see this very often in senior leadership, CEOs, executive board members. There'll be this air of, that doesn't apply to me. And that really does come from a lack of self-awareness that's just been allowed to go unchecked for too long.
Yep.
You know, and we're all guilty of it. You can be very, very advanced in one area of your life, and there'll be other things that just need work. And the same as when you were just starting in that career or whatever it is you do need to just put the work in to this skill of being able to front up and speak on camera.
Well, although this is not television, this is a podcast, I am not media trained per se, but I have done a few episodes now and then, and I've been listening back and I've been trying not to be a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And not every episode has been perfect, and I'm starting to learn that's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. It's it's all about the journey, and the process. But can people be over media trained?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can give you an example. About just before Christmas, I did an episode of Unique Professions that will not be aired. I don't think it is salvageable in any way, shape or form. There are myriad of reasons. But one of the things, I did my research about this person. I thought I had amazing questions. This person had been interviewed before, so I didn't want to ask the same sort of questions. Otherwise it's a bit boring and, it's not that exciting. But I did the interview. It wasn't the best. But when I listened back to it, I noticed a couple of really key themes. A couple of the questions that I did ask, this person had been asked before, it was almost like a robot speaking. Because I actually went on YouTube and there was a clip of her, speaking from about 10 years ago, and I had that same answer almost verbatim. So can people be over media trained? Because I think you need to show your personality as well.
Yeah. And there's a degree of X factor and charisma that can only come from surrendering to the process of just sitting and conversing like a human. And there are media trainers out there and that will instruct you to give an answer, right?
Yep.
To go, this is the message, stick to the message, repeat the message at rote, right? And I don't recommend memorization. A lot of speaking coaches do, right? There's a technique in which you would memorize a speech and then you get on stage and you deliver it on stage. Unfortunately, that doesn't fly in the modern media. Because the modern media, there's nowhere to hide. And your audience, I like to say, has never had such a keen BS filter. We know what BS stands for, right?
Yep.
We do not buy that. We don't buy memorised rote answers. And there are so many places now where it's saturation point where we can hear about a person, particularly if we're a fan, that we can go deep dive and we will pick up that there's this repeat line that we're getting. So instead, the elevated media trained person will trust. They will trust their knowledge. They'll trust their capacity to give a unique answer when they're asked a question, and they'll trust the person that they're being interviewed by not to leave them out, not to hang them out to dry, and instead just be in the moment, listen to the question and answer from your own expertise. And there's too much media training, and then there's also kind of not enough, right? Because there'll be people out there who will approach anything like a podcast appearance or even an appearance on tonight's 5 o'clock bulletin on the 9 News and say, what are the questions? I require the questions ahead of time, and they will prepare. Now, I've always said the preparation you should do for an interview, if you know the questions, is a bit of research, a bit of reading, and then start speaking. Start saying things out loud and feel the words rolling off your tongue so that when you say them in the interview, particularly on television where the pressure's on, it's not the first time you've said those things out loud. That should not be the scenario, right? I do television crosses that go to air live from Perth at 5 to 5 in the morning in the summertime, right? I spend about an hour before I get in there just rolling the words around, just saying, well, how do I feel about this thing? I'm going to just start crafting what I'm going to say. But what I don't do is memorize, 3 sentences that I'm going to say in the answer, because I can't predict what the host will say when they throw to me. And those moments like I share from, say, a cross I did in the project where I completely went to water and stopped speaking English, they come from being over-prepared. Where I went wrong in one of these crosses is that I planned 90 seconds of content. And I knew, because I've got a pretty good memory, and I was like, right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to throw to the guest, and then I'm going to get this, and I'm going to impress them because I'm just so multi-talented. It was all about me, right? And when I was confronted with the reality that the show was running late because all the preceding presenters had gone over, I was told, hey, you need to turn it into 30 seconds in my earpiece with about 10 seconds till I go to air. And I had nowhere to go because I was so carefully and finely prepared that I could not budge. So the truly great media trained person has learnt that it's not about you. It's about the product that you're contributing to, and that product has an audience of its own that it has a duty to, right? So you've got to find a way to realise that the media opportunity that is in front of you is not about, hey, I'm going to sell out my program, or I'm going to get all these clients, or I'm going to, even a worthy cause, I'm going to change the way people feel about this incredible cause. Yes, it's a wonderful sub-product of what you're going to do, but in that moment, in that media engagement, the most important thing you should be thinking about is, what's the answer to this question? And merely delivering it.
Yep. And now, speaking about podcasts and all things, you've actually got one yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you tell us all about it?
Well, I'll say that I've always contributed to one podcast for the last couple of years called The Experts Podcast. So I should give a shout out to that. But I just recently launched my own podcast. It's called Modern Media, How to Tell Your Story in a Rapidly Changing World. And for a long time, I first left full-time radio, I think about 6 years ago. A long time I've been thinking, yes, I should have a podcast. And there's been a lot of shoulding going on, David.
Yep.
Should, because you're a radio person, you should have a podcast. And people say to me, you should find it easy. And I'm like, well, I guess I should. So maybe I should have a podcast. But I was very conscious of the fact that podcasts take time.
They do.
They take money. They take connections. They take a lot of work. And I'm really big on only doing things like that if you can bring value. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to wait until I had a bank of knowledge and content that would add value to the conversation. And that time has come. And I just in February launched the first 3 episodes, and within 24 hours we took the podcast to number 10 on the Apple charts for marketing. So that was a pretty good result.
It was.
Yeah. So I'm really delighted that I was able to give it the space it needed, the respect it needed. It's really well planned out and executed and promoted. And that was really important to me to get this right, so that, if you're going to make something like that, you want people to hear it. You want the people who need it to know. Yeah.
What are some of the challenges as a media trainer?
The key challenge is reassuring the person there to be trained. That fear that I mentioned, no matter how it shows up, it might be perfectionism, it might be just obsessing over how you look or how you'll be perceived or what other people will think. The key challenge is reassuring the person coming in that things are going to be okay. Even if for whatever reason something does go wrong during that interview, it's not the end of the world. And very often we would say to each other around the radio station, it's just radio. We're not doing brain surgery here. It's not rocket science. Yep. We are just having a chat. And that can be very hard to convince a person of, even when we're talking about those modern media options, online, digital, podcasts, social media, TikTok, all the different things that we are now confronted with as an opportunity to grow a brand or to spruik, the benefits of a cause and try and make change. It really can be quite hard to reassure somebody that even if you are feeling quite vulnerable, even if you feel like you're maybe exposing a perceived weakness, that those things are the things that you're going to become famous for and that people will love you the most for. And that has to come a lot of the time from within. But if you don't start, If you don't start to watch yourself back, if you don't start to listen to yourself talking, you're never going to get to that point. It is a gradual process. And if it took me a good 20 years working in the broadcast media to get to a place where I was genuinely happy with the real version of me out there in the media, I'm here to tell you the work starts now. You've got to just get on with the job, and there will be some time where you're out there putting some representations of yourself, the odd podcast episode that you didn't feel like was perfect, right? There is going to be some time where you are just going to have to suck it up and get it out there, because until you put it out there, you're not going to hear the feedback, good, bad or indifferent. And there will be a lot of indifferent. You will put a lot of stuff out there and feel like people just aren't listening or paying attention. I had another podcast that I did about 5 years ago, again, feeling like I should. And I did the People of Perth podcast. It's still sitting there with very few listens, but it taught me something about the podcasting process that I've now implemented this second time around to get a much better result. Right? So unless you start, you're just not going to know. People, think about your own listening experience in the modern media and even on television and radio. It is very, very rare to pick up the phone or to send an email or a letter to the editor or to even like or comment on a post. You could be completely changed by something you see on TV and not ring the TV and radio station and go, oh, gosh, I love that. You could be completely changed. You could have changed the course of your life or career based on something you saw in a social media post, and you still wouldn't even comment on that post. It takes a lot for people to engage. So you have to trust that it will come eventually, right? But if you don't do anything, you can be guaranteed that you will hear nothing. So that is probably the key challenge. It's convincing people to trust that who they are and what they have to say is good enough and that it will one day garner a result.
Now, just earlier there, you were talking about modern media. I'm thinking, like things like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. Does your approach different? Is it different when you are doing training for that over, broadcast media? And what are some of those subtleties?
Yeah, there's a major couple set of subtleties, I would say. The approach is different, and it comes down to the difference between earned and owned media and also the difference between audiences, right? So if we talk about broadcast, television and radio appearances, they are earned appearances. You as the contributor don't have control over how your content is represented in those media. However, if we're talking about the digital and online space, generally you as the creator do have complete control. You're borrowing the space, right? Social media, I always like to remind people, isn't yours.
No.
But for the most part, it's free and you get a lot of control over what you put out there, right? So if you want the story to be pure and simple about the value that David Honey brings to this world, you can just make it a whole big feature about you and your podcast and all those things. But sadly, if you want to get onto the 5 o'clock news tonight, you're going to have to find an angle that the 5 o'clock news audience cares about, right? And that is going to have to be something that maybe you don't even realise is your angle yet, right? So that subtlety is a really important thing to remember, I guess, in terms of the kind of content you're contributing and who's in control. And you speak to a different audience depending on where you're at. However, the fundamentals are always the same. You speak to one person. That's the one crucial thing that if I could say to you, just walk away from listening to this podcast with, speak to one person, whether you're speaking on stage, whether you're speaking to TV or radio, whether you are speaking to your audience member on social media, think about that one person. It will make your performance so much more finely tuned. It addresses nerves because you're just thinking about this one person that you want to connect with, and your language is just going to sound so much better. Do you hear how I like to say you? We're talking to this one person who's listening to us right now. And that's what's so cool about being a modern media performer. Even in a broad setting, even if you're speaking to a large number of people, if you keep it coming back to that one person, that fundamental will always give you the edge in your performance.
I think you also have to think about your audience as well. You know, because like you were saying before, you've got to really think about your audience and what they want to know, what they want to hear. So how do you navigate that? How do you find out what your audience wants?
Ask them.
Yep.
Isn't it funny how we so often make this far more complicated than it needs to be?
Yeah.
And we are all walking around now with very immediate, very accessible ways to ask our audience what they think. If you have any followers, even if you only have, say, 10 followers, and I've met people who's building social media accounts, they've only got 10 followers or 10 subscribers to their mailing list. If they were in this room right now, that'd be a pretty hearty conversation.
Yep.
Ask them. Ask them why they're here. What's the value you think I bring? Even if they're your friends and family. What do you think is the value I bring? Why are we friends? What do you think makes me stand out? Ask them questions about your brand and then cultivate content that capitalizes on that. Yeah. If things are bigger, if you've got a 7,000 person strong mailing list, for instance, do a survey.
Yep.
Ask them, what keeps you here? How come you haven't hit unsubscribe so far? If I ran a course on this, or if I created some content on this, or if I went and sought media that allowed me to add value from this perspective, would you tune into that? Simply ask them. Yeah.
Because there's no point giving the audience content that they're not going to engage with.
Yeah, and the same applies to those earned media appearances, TV, radio, newspapers. You can ask the journalist or the producer or the presenter who's engaging you for that appearance, who are your audience? What do you think makes them tick? And I can tell you that any self-respecting broadcaster, any, even if they hate the world, they are deeply concerned by their audience, right? When your job depends on whether or not that key person in the audience is going to turn off the radio or not, you care what they think. So you will get a really solid answer. And so you're bringing your value to that TV or radio engagement, but you're adding a filter that really speaks to that audience member. And here's a tip. Generally for broadcasting, we're talking about grocery buying females. That is the most commercially viable sector of the community. You'll be surprised. All the data tells us that it is women in the household who tend to be making the purchasing decisions, right? Mm-hmm. So most content that goes through that broadcast media filter, it needs to appeal to a grocery buying female. Depending on the station, she might be aged anywhere between sort of 25 through to 75, and depending on the day part as well. We know that, say, Friday nights on TV, back when Today Tonight used to be on, we used to know that was a nice time for retirees to sit down and watch that kind of show, right? So the shows would choose content that appealed to that specific audience. But ask.
Yep. And I guess, as we've already discussed, you've had a broad range of knowledge and a broad career in media. What makes you stand out as a media trainer? Is it just the experience?
Yeah, and it's my unique blend of experience.
Yeah.
This is something I would say to any of my clients, so I will back myself in on this to the hill. Yeah. I am a radio broadcaster, first and foremost. My majority of my career has been in radio stations, and that means I have a capacity to trust, be in the moment, answer questions, and converse like a real person. I have worked as a newsreader on radio stations. I'm not a journalist. I didn't do journalism at school or at university. I did an arts degree at UWA, and then while I was at the arts degree, got a bit bored and went off to the Academy of Radio, which doesn't even exist anymore. It was essentially a TAFE course for broadcasters, and it gave me excellent contacts in the industry. From there, I went off and pursued a news reading and writing career, but I would continually get picked up and put into breakfast shows, and that was where I found my home. I have produced shows, and I have in turn also appeared on lots of TV, including lifestyle and travel television presenting that I've done a lot of. And, there are a lot of media trainers out there who are the opposite of me. They are people who have produced talkback radio, hard-hitting current affairs programs, and they can handle crises for big corporate companies and executives who are going to get grilled on camera by very tough journalists. And of course, they're journalists, they're reporters, they're people who've worked in newsrooms for television. Now, they are great media trainers, but they might not bring with them that same level of live television and radio experience that I physically have experienced myself. And very often that performer, your boss, the CEO that you're bringing in to be media trained, or the business owner who needs to promote their brand and grow a business, they need performance coaching. So my media training, and I've been told this, far more immersive. We recreate a radio station a bit like you've got here, and we practice what a regional radio interview will feel like. We practice what afternoons will feel like on a talkback radio station. Then we practice what breakfast radio will feel like on that same talkback radio station. They're all very different things. Then we'll practice what a television live cross will feel like if you're on location. Then we'll practice the same thing but in a studio and explain the differences, because if your CEO or executive who's being media trained does not understand these differences, that's where the deer in headlight moments and train wreck television moments will come from. And we've seen a few of those in recent weeks.
I wonder which one I'm thinking of. Hello, Woolworths.
Yeah. Look, I don't know if that's exactly what went wrong in that scenario.
Don't know.
But there was a degree of over-familiarisation, arrogance and presumed control that should not have existed within such an experienced CEO.
And that is actually quite a good point, because that particular episode, which was on, I think it was last week on Four Corners, that pretty much 30-second grab of that interview pretty much killed his career.
Yeah.
Because he resigned 2 days later.
Yeah, and I mean, there's talk from Woolworths directly that this was always going to be announced at that particular time, but it's going to be forever connected to that moment. Yep. And he's going to do, and will need to do, some strong reputational repair in all facets of the media as a result, because the thing he is known for is walking out on some very reasonable questions being asked of him.
That was the other thing I picked up. They weren't, terrible questions. They were pretty easy, well, not easy questions, but questions you would expect, I think.
Yeah, questions you'd expect the CEO of the largest grocery chain in Australia, largest employer in Australia, and he's a person who has some direct impact on what you and I, David, spend at the checkout every night. And that affects us. It does. I am sitting in the meat aisle trying to find the cheapest cut of meat every single time I'm there. I don't think that Brad Banducci is.
Yeah.
Right? So he has lost touch somewhere with what you and I are experiencing daily. And there are some people out there who will say he doesn't, including my co-host of the Experts podcast, Nick. He would say he doesn't have responsibility to mums and dads at home, but I think he does.
Yeah.
He's employing our kids. He's employing the machinery that is scanning my groceries instead of my kids. And he is lowballing our farmers at the farm gate as well. And that is why there's a Senate inquiry. And it is only right that the CEO of that company stands up and explains it to us.
Yep. I can't disagree with you. I thought it was a great piece of television. I thought it was. But I guess, with those sort of moments or those sort of things, when you were watching that, what was your media training perspective? What were you thinking when that all went to poop, basically, for him in that 30-second grab?
Yeah, the thing that I immediately thought was, where has he learned that it is okay to say, can we take that out?
Yes.
And there would have been media relationships that he'd had where he did get away with that from time to time. It doesn't mean it applies when you're sitting there in a pre-recorded interview scenario with Four Corners, especially a week out from a Senate inquiry.
Yeah.
So there's a degree of familiarity, like I said earlier. There's this sense of, I've got the control here because we're big advertisers and, the broadcasters wouldn't dare challenge us. It's like he forgot for a second that he was being interviewed by the national broadcaster. He was in a position where he needed to be held to account. The other thing that really came to me, now I'm losing my train of thought, but it just wasn't on to say, can we take that out? And then he failed to realise that mistakes are okay, is the other thing. It is totally human to say, you know what, that wasn't quite how I meant it.
Yep.
I apologise for asking to take it out. That, for a start, was foolish of me. I realise that we're always on the record, and I also realise that what I said about the boss of the, I think it was Triple C, it was consumer protection, it was wrong, right? And just to admit that he was wrong, like that just blew my mind. And like again, what I was saying earlier, there's just a degree of evidence there that this is someone who's lost touch with the everyday person, and that is not something that we want to see from a CEO. I know they are dealing with bigger problems and big issues, but for our CEOs to maintain integrity, they've got to remember that the impact of their decisions. And that was what I was struck by, this just degree of superiority and lack of empathy. Just lost touch.
Yeah. And now, is there a difference in when you're doing training on commercial and non-commercial? And, like, let's just say, I know you've worked with, Mix 94.5 here in Perth, and that is a commercial radio station.
Oh, yeah.
And is there a difference, if you're on that radio station rather than, let's just say ABC 720?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Right. So all my jobs have been with commercial radio stations, and I've worked for every commercial broadcaster in the country. If you want to look at the media columns of ownership, I've worked for all of them. And yes, commercial considerations are always made. Often the content that we are presenting needs to protect a commercial message or convey a commercial message in a way that feels like entertainment. It's not intended to it's not intended to be unfair or to kind of sway your thinking in any way. It's just that no one's bills are getting paid unless there's revenue provided from advertisers on commercial radio stations. And commercial radio and television is in big trouble. All of those big major media companies, their revenue is way down because of the segmentation of the media. We've got all these other places where advertisers can put their dollars now in the modern media landscape. So you as a broadcaster are continually thinking about commercial arrangements. There's a risk then that as a broadcaster, you might not go as hard on the Woolworths boss because they're such a big advertiser. So as discerning listeners to any piece of content, same as if you're scrolling and researching on the web, you've got to consider the source, right? So that's the thing that's a little bit different. The best broadcasters, though, realise that in spite of the power of that advertiser, they've got to still hold these people to account. And I would say that commercial broadcasting, particularly talkback radio and current affairs television, does a pretty good job of maintaining that integrity. Over at the ABC, and I haven't been employed by these guys, but I've contributed as a commentator, you do have to avoid sounding like you're backed by any kind of commercial arrangement, because at the end of the day, your key commercial investor at the ABC is the taxpayer. Yeah. It is our station, the ABC. We're all paying for it. And if you're listening to Triple J, it is the youth broadcaster, so it should be young people who are drawn to that content. And if I'm listening to it at nearly 43 years old and digging the content, then they're getting something sadly wrong over there at Triple J. They need to be targeting their content to youth and speaking to their issues. And I'd like to say these days, I think they're doing a lot better at that than they were maybe, say, 15, 20 years ago, when really they were a commercial radio station dressed up as a national broadcaster. On ABC 720 here in Perth, it's about approaching things from a much more egalitarian viewpoint, ideally still speaking to a broad audience, and avoiding sounding like you've got any commercial influence or interest.
I don't want to harp on about the Woolworths work, but what you did say was very interesting, and I would agree that if that show was broadcast on 7, 9 or 10, I don't think that question or those line of questions would be aired. I don't reckon.
Yeah, look.
That's my opinion. If it was ABC, SBS, I reckon, fair game.
Yep.
But I reckon, especially if the program is, sponsored by Woolworths, they're not going to let their brand be damaged in the program.
And that's why some media trainers have said in the discourse that they can't understand why Brad, as he prefers to be called, was allowed by the Woolworths media team to take an interview with the national broadcaster. They would have, preferred him to get the easy run, the perceived easy run on a commercial television station. I think there's a lot of evidence that our commercial radio, Ben Fordham didn't go easy on him. Steve Mills on 6PR Breakfast didn't go easy on him back in the Australia Day saga that Woolworths endured only a few short weeks ago. So I think there's evidence that commercial television-owned radio stations were more than happy to hold him to account. And I think that the two need each other so much. Like Woolworths requires the audience that the talkback radio and television has.
Yep.
And so they would be foolish to drop their advertising if their boss were held to account by these questions. I can't say if I agree with you or not. I think that I would like to think that the integrity of the journalists and the shows involved is pretty strong. And I'll tell you this, if you talk to your average producer of a commercial television or radio current affairs program, they are deeply connected to the integrity and maintaining those boundaries between advertorial content as opposed to editorial content.
Well, I'm going to move away from that, but certainly food for thought.
It is, fascinating conversation.
We could be debating this for the next hour or so.
We could.
Yeah. Going back onto media training, now, how has your process evolved?
Yeah, the Confidence on Camera program was something that kicked off for me in 2020 when the in-person workshops I was hoping to run couldn't. And so I turned it into an online program. And what was great about that time was everyone was sitting at home and they were working remotely and they went, we now finally understand why most everyday people in everyday jobs do need some media skills. So it wasn't hard for me to convince the market about what that is. Now what I think has evolved from my point of view personally is that there's more than just a need to crush that initial fear and do a bit of training online to improve that skill set. There's now a need for all of us to be what I like to call a modern media performer. And if you're a university student coming through and being educated and going into the workforce, or a CEO hoping to take that next step with your career or take your company to the next level, there's a lot of us who require multiple platform communication skills. Yep. And that would be the difference into my approach that's changed. I was quite focused on confidence on camera and that initial skill set. Now it's the full gamut. It's, can you host a podcast? And if you are going to host a podcast, what are you going to do? How are you going to roll that thing out? What's involved in interviewing? What's involved in being interviewed for a podcast? If you're going out there as a strategy to get podcast appearances, are you being strategic about how you navigate those podcast appearances? If you are making social media content, are you being strategic? Have you got consistent messaging that's coming through so that anybody who stumbles upon your overall online presence can go, that's exactly what David Honey is about? Anybody who, we used to say this about radio stations, you flip my old Triumph 2500 when I was going to uni around Perth. You'd press the button, right? The Pressmatic Deluxe on the radio. You'd press the button and you go, that's 96 FM. I know what that station lives, breathes, and is all about from even 30 seconds of listening. Like back then, even the ads reflected the brand, right? Everything that is out there in the modern media landscape that represents your brand should say, Carmen Braidwood is a media trainer. It should just be plain as day to anybody walking down the street. And that is not always easy to do ourselves because as individuals, we are multifaceted. We've got a lot of things we're into and we want to be into, and it can get a little bit clouded. And that's where my approach has changed in that I love to go, let's take a snapshot with you and let's have a look at where you fit in the modern media landscape. What do we perceive you to be and what's reality? And we need to make sure that reality and perception come together because as we know, perception is reality. Yep. And if you're not telling your narrative and your story, someone else is going to do it for you and this alternate reality will just take shape and run away from you. Yep. So that's where my approach has changed.
Now, as you are are a broadcast. How has radio changed?
It's so different.
It is.
I still love it. It's just so great. I do. It's a very self-affirming thing to know that something you've dedicated so much of your life to, you still care about. The things that have changed, though, it remains an incredibly intimate and immediate format. It is now, though, as much about the social media content as it is the live broadcast moment. Podcast is huge for radio now, and so those individual day parts, breakfast show, morning show, whatever, the afternoon show, whatever the day part might be, it can become its own brand out there in the whole modern media landscape. So we're no longer just competing with other radio stations anymore. Radio is competing with other content platforms. So if you've got a great TikTok creator, the eyeball and the ear hole of the listener you're chasing could be stolen by that TikTok creator. And so you've got to find a way to offer up something that's as good. So it's no longer just like Perth people competing against Perth people. You are competing on the world stage for attention. It's a wonderful opportunity, and it's also a big challenge.
And it's also about engagement as well, because some people, and I have been guilty of this, I might be flicking up on my phone, looking at Facebook or whatever, and I'm watching something on Netflix as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's that kind of engagement as well. And I'm wondering has social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, has that kind of helped media in some ways, or has it even been a disadvantage, or a bit of both?
It's walking the dog now. That's what it's doing. It used to be that the broadcast media were setting the standard for the way that listeners engage and viewers and audience engage with content, right? We'd sort of go, I need it to be more polished and pristine, just like I see in the nightly news. No, it's the opposite now.
Yeah.
Television shows are being produced in a scrappy, handheld camera style delivery. News bulletins are sharing content direct from social media content that's been shared. They are scouring social media for their leads, for their stories, and the style, the whole short, sharp production style that we are seeing in social media feeds is just emerging in traditional media. So that's definitely changed. It's social media has been huge to broadcast media, and it's taken a while, but they're all in. They are the big media companies recognise this. They're employing people to create that content, and there are a lot of people out there who worry that quality journalism will go by the way as a result. No, that those quality journalists will just be employed by different people. And they'll probably still be owned by the one key big media column owner, but they'll be creating content for a different platform once the revenue moves over, to those digital spaces. And there'll be a period of adjustment, but it'll work out.
It'll work. Now, I've got one final question for you. What does the future hold for you as a media trainer and a broadcaster? And what are some of the goals that you've yet to achieve that you'd like to?
I still want to do live television someday, David. Very old school kind of TV goal.
Yep.
But to me, the reason I became a broadcaster was because of the personal challenge that it involved from a performance point of view.
Yep.
I wanted to learn how to do what you and I are doing just now, to speak and comfortably on air, and I've achieved that goal, and I'd love to be able to do the same thing as a live television broadcaster. And I'm not letting that go. I love the media, like I said, and I think that one day maybe there'll be an opportunity to do that, but maybe it won't be on TV. Maybe it'll be on a live online platform or something like that. So that remains a goal, and I see that still as being a way to connect with people. That's what I love about it, that sense of creating this really diverse group of connected people who all share a common goal or a common interest. That's really intriguing to me. And the way I've set up, what is really just a consultancy. I'm a sole trader. I love having the creative space to make my podcast, to speak to interesting people on their podcast, to chase opportunities in the broadcast media that interest me, or to go on MC events. I've got a huge interest in travel here in Western Australia. That's why I still work on Destination WA. It's a show that I'm so proud of. The content is beautifully shot. The stories are beautifully told. And I know, because I met them out on the road, that Australians from all over are watching these episodes on YouTube and coming to this state. So I'm really passionate about bringing people to WA. This state has so much to offer. So I hope that my future includes further ways to showcase that to the world. And yeah, I love being from Perth now. when I grew up here, I was a little bit, I had a bit of that cultural cringe going on and just couldn't wait to get out of my hometown of Kalamunda and work on the East Coast. But now I love being from Perth. I love living here, and I hope that it involves only further enhancement of my lifestyle in WA and travelling all over the state, whether it's to tell stories or just hang out in my caravan with my husband and my puppy dog.
Excellent. Well, I hope you do that. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Unique Professions. Thank you, Carmen.
Thanks, Dave. It's been nice to meet you.